All right, today we're going to dive into a major new report from the Heritage Foundation that makes a pretty bold claim that the future of America itself is directly tied to the health of the family. It's called Saving America by Saving the Family, and it lays out what the authors see as a national crisis and their sweeping plan to fix it. So let's jump right in and unpack their argument. The report kicks things off with this really powerful moral statement. And this isn't just some throwaway line, it's actually the foundation for everything else they're going to say. The authors are claiming that American culture has started to prioritize the desires of adults over what they see as the fundamental needs and rights of children. So, what's the big idea here? Well, here it is. The report's core thesis is that the health of the American Republic is directly linked to the health of the family. In their view, this isn't just some social issue. It's a matter of national survival that affects literally everything, from our economy to how we function as a society. To build this case, the authors don't start with philosophy. They start with cold, hard numbers. So let's take a look at the statistical picture they're painting of the modern American family. And they use that word sobering for a good reason. What they do is they lay out a whole series of data points that, when you put them all together, really paint this picture of a dramatic, almost unbelievable transformation in American life over just the last 60 years. Now, check this out, because the scale of this drop is just wow. The report points out that all the way through the mid-1960s, about 3/4 of all U.S. households were headed by a married couple. Today, that number has plummeted to below half. That is a fundamental shift in how Americans are living.
Okay, this next number, it's pretty staggering. 40%. That's the percentage of births in America that now happen outside of marriage. Now, to put that into perspective, the report reminds us that way back in 1965, Daniel Patrick Moynihan was calling for national action when the rate for Black women hit 25%. Today's national average is way, way higher than what was considered a full-blown crisis back then.
So this slide gets into what the report calls a huge demographic challenge, the replacement rate. And that's basically the number of births you need just to keep a population stable is 2.1. And where are we? Well, according to the report, the U.S. rate is projected to be just 1.59. To put it plainly, the authors are arguing that if this trend continues, the America of the future is going to have a lot fewer Americans in it.
Okay, so why does any of this matter? What's the big deal? Well, the report connects these statistics directly to a whole bunch of really big societal problems. We're talking about everything from weaker schools and higher poverty to having fewer innovators and even a direct threat to programs like Social Security, which absolutely depend on a growing workforce.
All right, so that's the what. Now the report digs into the why. How did we get here? They point to two huge forces that they say really kicked things into high gear, starting back in the 1960s. And this timeline here kind of lays out that pivotal period they're talking about. They argue it was this perfect storm of big government policy changes and some really radical cultural shifts that just completely changed the game for the American family. So let's look at the first big cause they identify, the welfare state. Their whole argument here is that these government programs, as well-intentioned as they might have been, ended up creating what they call perverse incentives. And here's their argument in a nutshell. The report claims that these welfare programs basically created huge financial penalties for getting married. For a lot of people, it actually made more economic sense to be a single parent. In their view, the government check effectively started replacing the role of a father in the home. All right, the second major cause they point to is cultural. The authors argue that movements like the sexual revolution and second-wave feminism really pushed this idea of radical individualism. And in their analysis, this made things like casual sex and not having kids totally normal, while at the same time they say the traditional family started to get a bad rap, even stigmatized. So after laying out the problem and what they see as the causes, the report shifts gears. It's not all doom and gloom. They offer a really comprehensive, multi-part plan for what they call restoration. So let's check out the solutions they're putting on the table. And they frame their entire policy plan around these three big ideas. It's a mix of getting rid of what they see as the bad stuff, the negative incentives, and creating brand new, positive supports for marriage and family. So under that first goal, their main target is welfare reform. They're calling for a complete overhaul to get rid of any financial penalties for marriage in all welfare programs. And they want to couple that with stronger work requirements, arguing that, hey, work and marriage are the two surest paths out of poverty. Now, when we get to their third point, actively supporting families, this is where the proposals get really interesting and pretty bold. For example, they're suggesting these things called nest accounts. Think of them like government-seeded starter funds for newlyweds. They also want to take the big tax credit for adoption and apply it to married parents for their own biological kids. That's a huge financial boost. And then there's this new credit for at-home childcare, which is designed to totally rebalance how the government looks at family support. Yeah, let's zoom in on that last one because it's a really interesting idea. The Home Child Care Equalization Credit. The authors basically argue that right now, federal policy is heavily tilted towards paid outside daycare, and they see this as unfair, as discriminating against families where one parent decides to stay home. So this new credit, they say, is all about leveling that playing field.
Okay, so finally, the report wraps up by framing this whole situation not just as some dry policy debate, but as a really fundamental choice about what kind of country America wants to be in the future. And they lay it out as two very different paths. You've got path one, which is basically the status quo, what they characterize as a culture focused on adult fulfillment and desires. Then there's path two, what they call restoration. And that's a conscious choice to put the family unit and especially the well-being of children back at the center of our culture and our policy.
So, at the end of the day, the stakes, according to this report, well, they couldn't be higher. They're basically saying the choice is between national decline on one hand and national renewal on the other, and that the fate of the family is what will ultimately tip the scales. Ultimately, the report makes a powerful, data-driven case for its point of view, and it leaves us with this huge question. Is the family just a private lifestyle choice, or is it a public good, something absolutely essential for the nation's future? That question is right at the heart of their whole argument, and it's definitely something to think about. Thanks for watching this explainer.